Hello everyone, MockRock here, and welcome back to the Signature Move tier list, where we dive into the history of an iconic video game technique, break it apart in a series of trials, and finally, stack it up against the competition. Today's contender is a classic undergoing something of a renaissance, the Screw Attack from the long-running Metroid series, as well as Samus and Dark Samus's appearances in the Super Smash Bros. Titles. The role of the Screw Attack has changed a surprising amount over the years, more than many iconic moves, but has that adaptation kept it at the top of the pack? Let's begin. As before, we'll be exploring the Screw Attack throughout the video game world and evaluating it on power, utility, synergy, style, and design. These scores will place it in either A, B, or C tier, with further promotions or demotions into S and F tier done on a case-by-case basis. For this video, the games included will be a number of 2D Metroid titles, its forays into 3D with the Prime Trilogy and Other M, its spin-off Metroid Prime Pinball, and every Super Smash Bros. Game to date. Please stick around to the end for a brief update on this series and the channel in general, but for now, we'll lead off with power. The Screw Attack is an all-encompassing energy field that surrounds Samus while airborne, most commonly initiated with a jump while moving forward. Metroid was a key player in helping to solidify the Metroidvania genre that remains popular to this day, a genre based around continuously upgrading the power of your character, and the Screw Attack is powerful enough to typically be one of, if not the final abilities that Samus gains access to. In the 2D games, it's very quick to throw out and deals enough damage to take out grunt enemies with little effort, generally dealing substantial damage to boss enemies as well, and is especially effective against electrical defenses. This impressive damage is also carried through into Other M, where the Screw Attack continues to vaporize smaller enemies and quickly deals with larger ones that were used as mini-bosses earlier in the game, or even enemies that couldn't previously be defeated whatsoever. The attack is extremely responsive here, and when combined with Other M's tight movement mechanics, Samus can absolutely shred a path forward for herself. This power, unfortunately, begins to fall off hard in Samus's other 3D outings with the Prime series. While the Screw Attack can still output decent damage, its payoff is noticeably less impressive, and this alone wouldn't be great, but Samus is now also harshly jolted right out of the move whenever she connects with a wall or a larger enemy. This is a scenario which comes up a lot as well, courtesy of the straight line that the Screw Attack now locks her into and the significantly clunkier startup, now needing to be initiated out of a slow-paced triple jump rather than being available on demand. This makes it very hard to use in the Prime series myriad of tight hallways, and in more open environments, the vastly increased spatial coverage demands of 3D gameplay often make the Screw Attack feel inadequate compared to Samus's arsenal of powerful projectile attacks. With all these factors combined, the Screw Attack tends to take a pretty heavy back seat here. Is it useless? No, but the difference in application is striking. Many Metroid titles also feature invincibility on the Screw Attack, and in some games this can be incredibly useful, but this is far from a constant. In Super Smash Bros., the Screw Attack has been Samus's up special ever since the original game. It's never been incredibly powerful or damaging, short of some exploits where you force your opponent out of it early.
Yeah, especially from that point.
However, its high speed still makes it a very valuable attack to have, as its quick startup and invincibility often make it a very viable out-of-shield attack. This is a valuable asset for any character to have, but especially so for someone like Samus, who would otherwise be much easier to overwhelm in close quarters. It also has a bit of inherent protection if you miss, as it goes high enough to mix up landings on platforms, and its physics allows some room for ambiguous drift, so while throwing it out too carelessly still is certainly not a good idea, it is marginally less punishable than some similar attacks. The power level of the more familiar form of the Screw Attack is very high, at its best looking like what other series would use as a temporary pickup. This is tempered, however, by Smash's balancing and the somewhat pitiful offensive use it has in the Prime games. Still, the majority of its appearances remain its most potent, so it receives a power score of 4 out of 5. The utility of the Screw Attack in 2D Metroid is more limited than it may first appear, and in fact, using it at all isn't always necessary in order to complete a game. It allows you to break through destructible blocks, a long-running staple of the series, but many of these can be destroyed in other ways as well, and the ones that do require the Screw Attack often lead to optional routes. Now, to be clear, the kind of infinite jumps you're watching right now aren't a result of the Screw Attack, but rather the Space Jump, a different upgrade unlocked earlier in the game. The screw attack is simply performed out of any forward-facing jump, including those done in the air. This isn't quite how things always work in 3D though, as the Prime titles turn the space jump into a simple double jump and instead do fold multi-jump duties into the screw attack, as well as making it responsible for wall jumps, which was another previously distinct ability. Being realistic, the screw attack is just acting as a convenient way to combine several independent actions that Samus was already established as being capable of, but the Prime games do consider this one upgrade to be responsible for all of them, so that's how it will be evaluated. Even under this criteria though, its utility is still surprisingly muted. While it does allow you to cross larger gaps than you'd otherwise be able to, there's still a relatively strict limit of 5 jumps, a pale imitation of Samus's aerial abilities in 2D, and the mostly locked-in direction and the way she bounces off surfaces means that it can be surprisingly clunky, not allowing for a huge amount of use cases, especially because it can't be used to gain any kind of vertical distance. Even in some instances where it would still potentially be useful working within those limitations, the devs just say no anyways, with elements like invisible walls put in place to stop you. As for the wall jump, while it may technically be available everywhere, it's essentially never useful outside of a small amount of dedicated wall jump surfaces, for all intents and purposes just acting as another elevator with the screw attack being the key. This is how it appears in Metroid Prime Pinball as well, in a wall jump minigame that allows you to collect upgrades. Other M, meanwhile, revokes this functionality as the space jump and wall jumps become distinct abilities once again, albeit the space jump and screw attack are unlocked at the same time, so the effect on progression is somewhat similar to the Prime titles. In Super Smash Bros., the screw attack serves as a recovery move, as do most up specials, but it's not especially amazing at the job. Not only is the range underwhelming, but its angle is also very rigid and it locks Samus into freefall, which is still the most common outcome of recovery moves, but has become a bit less guaranteed over time as the series progresses. It does offer reasonable protection on the way up, and regardless is something that Samus is going to have to use, but her players won't always be thrilled about it. This applies doubly in the games before instant ledge snaps were introduced, as the screw attack's lingering trajectory often left players extremely vulnerable, and in Melee in particular, you see Samus mains avoid trying to go directly to the ledge with it as often as possible. Its use cases in 2D Metroid are extremely limited, the considerably broader array of actions it can perform in 3D are still hamstrung in other areas, and while its recovery function in Super Smash Bros. Is valuable, it hardly excels in the role. So altogether, the screw attack receives a utility score of 2.5 out of 5. While the screw attack is a powerful weapon in and of itself, it's the synergy between it and the space jump in 2D Metroid that makes it truly devastating. These two abilities pair near flawlessly together and allow the player almost to feel like they're breaking the rules of the game, more than making up for the otherwise somewhat limited interactions between the screw attack and the rest of Samus's kit. The importance of the space jump can be keenly felt in the original Metroid, which hadn't introduced it yet. While the screw attack is still undeniably very useful here, especially given how limited Samus's aiming is, it plays a very different role when not used with its partner ability. The space jump's sometimes awkward and unintuitive triggering can get in the way of the screw attack's effectiveness here. The jumps need to be done with a pretty specific timing that can definitely feel weird, but with practice this tends to be a minor bump in the road. These use cases for the move are somewhat preserved in Other M, but in the Prime titles they're almost entirely taken away, and while the more limited space jump can be used to gain additional height to allow the screw attack to cross more gaps, in practice the levels are intentionally designed so as not to let this be a major feature. Super Smash Bros. Take on the screw attack can be used perfectly fine standalone, but is also frequently used as the finisher for her up-air ladder combos, mostly in the newer titles where her up-air works a lot more consistently for this purpose. The screw attack's limited knockback means that it's not the most potent setup in the world, but it will kill early under the right circumstances, and free additional damage is never something you're going to be complaining about. This is one of its most notable use cases, although as with essentially any quick move, there are other ways to integrate it into your combo game. The screw attack's lackluster standalone recovery also gets a massive boost when you start mixing it up alongside Samus's grapple beam and bomb stalling, all of which are individually exploitable but come together to grant her some surprisingly slippery returns to the stage. When combined with the symbiotic nature of its application in the 2D Metroid titles, it receives a synergy score of 4.5 out of 5. Like most signature moves, the screw attack is based on a pretty simple concept, meaning that there's plenty of room to embellish it. In this particular instance, though, the automatic, constant presence of the move means that the developers need to rein things in a bit more, as screen-filling particle effects, for example, would probably start to get pretty exhausting if they popped up every time Samus jumped. The screw attack is kept to a fairly straightforward energy field, which, while not especially stylish, is elegantly suited to its purpose, with pinwheel trails and crackling electricity that I think are especially impressive in its higher fidelity high-fidelity pixel art incarnations. Its color and finer details have moved around a fair amount between installments, but the core has typically stayed fairly intact, and it does look recognizable despite the individual elements not being anything especially groundbreaking. When it comes to audio, sound design in both the Metroid and Smash series is typically excellent. From a technical perspective, yes, the Screw Attack is consistently well made, with something of a unifying direction for the sound effects, but I wouldn't call it as consistent as some of its peers, possibly because the core of the sound isn't the most distinct or memorable one we've looked at. As a relatively straightforward looking and sounding signature move with some minor flourishes and pitfalls, the Screw Attack receives a style score of 2.5 out of 5. We're dealing with an extremely powerful move in 2D Metroid, powerful enough to mostly eliminate the challenge enemies present outside of boss fights, which is a risky proposition to make a staple element of your series. I'd say that it largely succeeds, however, thanks to the nature of Metroid's structure. A typical Metroid game will throw Samus into a hostile environment at a low power level, often with increasingly convoluted reasons for why she went on yet another mission without access to any of her gear, and then spends the game building her power level up. Before the end, there's usually some kind of victory lap sequence which sends her back across the world she spent the game opening up, and the Screw Attack is used as a late game way to facilitate this victory lap. Most enemy encounters will be old news by now, so the Screw Attack is one facet that allows the player to avoid excessive repetition of this challenge in favor of more adventure and puzzle-based gameplay as you backtrack through the world. This obviously isn't universally true in 2D, but it's the trend and has clearly been created with careful consideration of the gameplay structure. Samus Returns took a bit of a different approach with a weaker Screw Attack, and your results may vary, but for me, it didn't really work. Downgrading an attack this powerful may play out okay in a vacuum, but it feels like a letdown when you have other iterations to compare it to, and it made progression less exciting. Now, admittedly, the Screw Attack was splitting power duties with the game's new powerful resource-based Aeon attacks here, so from the perspective of promoting gameplay balance and diversity, this does make sense, but pulling the legs out from a previous monster of a move still felt bad on a gut level. This is highlighted further by being a remake of a game which featured a much stronger Screw Attack, but it's still ultimately one 2D Metroid game among many, and they overall handled the move well given its extreme nature. More so than I think I can say for the considerably slower-paced first-person Prime titles. The Screw Attack was actually excluded from the original Metroid Prime, and was added somewhat begrudgingly in its sequel thanks to heavy fan request. It's easy to see why internal developer reception to the idea was mixed, as the mechanic proved to be challenging to implement into an FPS environment, and the payoff still wasn't especially satisfying or faithful to previous appearances. The transition from 2D to 3D is an infamously bumpy one sometimes, but many signature moves have also made the switch over very gracefully. Link's spin attack was dramatically worse with a vertical axis and broader screen space to account for, so his range was expanded and it was made upgradable to compensate. Great additions which carried forward throughout the series. Mario's jumps, Kirby's inhale, Metal Gear's box, Sonic's spin dash. There's a long list of abilities which handled the change a lot more smoothly than the Screw Attack could. To the Prime team's credit, the switch from platforming controls to a first-person shooter is a bigger genre leap than many of its contemporaries had to deal with, and a lot of changes had to be made across the board, with most of Samus's moveset receiving heavy nerfs. But it was the Screw Attack that was arguably hit the hardest out of anything. To their credit again, the team also seemed to recognize this, as while in Metroid Prime 2 Echoes the Screw Attack was given out as a traditional late-game power-up, Metroid Prime 3 Corruption instead opted to make it unlockable much earlier in the game, as it no longer represented that kind of ultimate power that it used to. This didn't come with the same pitfalls as Samus Returns either, as lower expectations had already been established. Better to just let the player make more use of its new functionality, and it can still be fun for what it's worth, although this immediately makes the inclusion of the grapple beam a bit harder to justify than it previously had been. In Echoes, the Screw Attack largely usurped this ability, which, as an alternate way to traverse familiar environments at the end of the game, is totally fine. You've already swung on these grapple points. If you don't want to do it again, okay. In Corruption, grapple points had to be made more elaborate to justify their existence because of how quickly they'd otherwise be usurped, which, to be fair, resulted in some pretty stunning moments. It's also worth noting that the wall jump use of the Screw Attack has pretty much no skill aspect at all here. There's a massive input buffer in place so that I can press jump at essentially any point and still gain height no problem, further contributing to the Screw Attack feeling like a glorified elevator. There is more of a timing test in Metroid Prime Pinball, but this extremely basic minigame is the only time the Screw Attack makes an appearance. It's such an extreme genre departure this time that it's tempting to simply hand wave away, but the fact that there are multiple genres at this point which have struggled to satisfyingly integrate one of Samus's most distinctive abilities abilities has to be taken into consideration. The series would continue in 3D with Other M, but as this game tried to replicate more of the character's 2D gameplay style, at least as far as character control went, the Screw Attack largely represented a return to form. The only thing I'm not fond of here is that this move incentivizes jumping through enemies, and a move called the Overblast is done automatically by landing on top of one, so you're inevitably going to trigger by accident sometimes. This wouldn't be a huge issue if not for the fact that some enemies can actually resist the Overblast, which can be a little bit annoying. In Super Smash Bros., the Screw Attack certainly makes sense to have on Samus's kit, and while there are other places besides the up special slot it could be put, it's a sensible enough choice. Smash insists on giving a lot of the fastest up-close out-of-shield options to zoner characters, which is a design philosophy I disagree with and have discussed at length before, but the Screw Attack at least isn't the most egregious example out there because it does require pretty tight spacing. Its multi-hits have been a persistent issue as well, and this is partially just a result of the way Smash has always handled multi-hit moves, but because of the speed the Screw Attack travels at and its relatively small hitboxes, it has had an especially difficult time reliably carrying opponents with it. Overall, with a strong showing in its ubiquitous role and some hiccups elsewhere, the Screw Attack receives a design score of 3 out of 5. The points are in, and now it's time to apply our weightings and generate the final score. Power, utility, synergy, style, design. The Screw Attack has been hampered by a number of issues, largely in its spin-off appearances that significantly impact its performance in this video. However, an overall very strong showing in its Bedrock 2D outings puts in a lot of work to balance things out. By the skin of its teeth, with the literal minimum score possible to qualify, the Screw Attack takes its place among the solid ranks of A tier. And that was the Screw Attack. Thanks for watching, everyone. Normally this would be the end of the video, but I just wanted to pop in and give a bit of an update because I know it's been a while since I've posted here, and I've been posting a lot to my second channel, MockRock Talk, so I've naturally gotten a bunch of questions about, am I done with MockRock? Am I just doing second channel stuff now? And the short answer is no. Being away for this long was actually an accident. I did focus on second channel stuff back in the summer just because me and my girlfriend were going on summer vacation, and MockRock Talk content takes so much less time to make, so I wanted to have a backlog of it built up I could release over the summer, and then we both got COVID, so there was no summer vacation anyways. But in any case, since then, yes, I have been working on other projects as well, including ones with sponsorship deadlines and things like that, but I've also been working on this one the entire time. They just take absolutely forever to make. I've had to play through basically the entire Metroid catalog, so much research, so many re-recordings, and when you combine that with the fact that they tend to be really low performers, I'm not expecting a lot of people to actually watch this video. As someone who does YouTube for a living, it's just really hard to justify. So this was the final episode of the Signature Move tier list, as I briefly mentioned in my AMA video near the end of last year. Hopefully I did it justice. As far as my clearly unbiased opinion goes, I thought it was a pretty decent video. If I'm being honest, this one likely never would have been made either, except that my patrons, YouTube members, and Twitch subs voted on it a while back, and if I put up a poll, I've got to eventually honor the poll. I've been chipping away at this thing in the background for ages, but again, long-term, very high-effort video that makes no money. Scary prospect when this is your full-time job. So what's actually happening is some sponsorships I picked up on the second channel are being essentially used to fund this video. Speaking of which, channel plans. So yeah, I was never intending to be away from MockRock for this long. I'm not going to say that uploads here aren't going to slow down at all anymore, and that's because the more casual formats, you know, top 10 lists, that kind of thing, those are all being moved over to the second channel now. And that means that everything left here is going to be a bit more, you know, premium, top of the line kind of stuff, which obviously do take a little bit longer to make. But if you liked the more casual formats, good news. If you haven't checked the second channel MockRock Talk out yet, there's actually way more of that kind of stuff on there than I could ever make over here. So for example, 2 video series that a lot of people have asked me to do follow-ups on, the top 10 underrated Smash moves, and then the sad story of Kirby and Smash. Both of those are things I'm potentially interested in following up on at some point. And if I did any more underrated moves spotlights, that would likely go on MockRock Talk, whereas if I did more sad story of certain character videos, those would stay on MockRock because they're proper video essays. And then I do have one more purely Smash focused video that I'm planning to put out this year, and I do have the Twilight Princess Hardy retrospective in the background, and I keep hearing rumors about the Switch getting a port of Twilight Princess coming up, but I've been hearing those for a long time now, so if by early next year something concrete hasn't materialized, I'm just gonna pull the trigger on it anyways. And then of course plenty more second channel MockRock Talk stuff coming up too, facecam based tier lists, top 10 videos, companion videos to stuff posted here, reactions, maybe some smaller game reviews, all that kind of stuff. But I think that should more or less do it for today. Thanks for your support on the Signature Move tier list series, everyone, as well as my content in general, and look forward to more coming up on both channels. Later, people.